Well, I'm going to, at the risk of cognitive dissonance, do something I've never done in my life, which is to do a poetry reading while some pertinent and perhaps impertinent science slides go scrolling behind me. All I can tell you is that the slides were chosen really to go with the poems rather than the other way around. Let's see if this. No. Afraid nobody showed me how to advance the slides here. Okay. Ah. Now, about the smartest thing that I have ever read about the relationship between the arts and sciences, contrary to what Snow believed in the two cultures, is this statement by Robert Frost about poetry. And then the sly old farmer, as you can see, is claiming that science is also all about metaphor if we'll take the soft impeachment of a friend. Of course, there was nothing ever soft about him. Uh, and so here is a poem that is almost purely metaphor, The Clock Made of Confetti. It takes a long time. All those blossoms had to bloom and die. First, the star-shaped forsythia swept under by red and white azalea petals, scattered like confetti, the morning after a big party when no one remembers what they're celebrating. Then the pink crabapple had to let go its love notes, lately interred with a white Bradford pear. There were more whose fell than I can remember, embraced by age and the slow pull of gravitation. Cicada shells I kicked out of my way, and the brown wren, too small for this winter, brought down by some marauding cat. I repeated your name each day until snow covered the lawn with its white leopard's breath. And when it melted and spring came, I knew you were gone. Oh. Here's an excellent artistic example of metaphor. Helen Chadwick. Scent. Afterwards, I smell you like hot butter rising from my thighs, my hand pollinated with your musk, and the tack of your underclothes spouts lavender and lilies of the valley in my reptilian brain. Furiously, I drive one-handed to my next stop, my fingers almost sticky with your smell, the last trace of your liquor in me, like ECT, like a tree struck down in an electrical storm, kept twitching by the ozone released around it, every axon and dendrite shaken in its spine by the memory of you. O Proust knew why the ancients met eternity, surrounded by unguents and perfumed creams. Even the dead can dream, shaken by such a scent. So one of the things that enables the brain to create metaphor is the very mathematics of the brain. Euphoria. The world is round. From 40 miles away, only the topmasts of ships appear headed to the Bay Bridge, their hulls buried beneath the curvature of gray water along a short segment of latitude. If you find the angle at which something shrinks to nothing, you can get the distance. A cross of wood, a length of twine, and soon enough, the equator of existence becomes a number as real as the belly of an apple, a thing in the mind. At sea, you never doubt their rapture, Archimedes predicting Newton, Michelson his Einstein, their excitement transparent without fog of drug or spectacle. And how big would a forest have to be if each tree stood for a single neuron in such a brain? A field as large as Manhattan, or Rhode Island, or all of Montana. We calculate such vastness. We do not measure. Here is the child's answer, stretching his arms beyond his parents' grasp. This big, his body says. No, really, how big? This big. No, bigger. You ever want to see the calculation? It's in Lee Booth's movie, Euphoria. And of course, a huge number of cells leads to a probabilistic theory of how the brain works. Touching, almost touching, all those neurons. And then, of course, it's not just probability, but also how the brain is put together. And this is the smartest thing I've ever seen about creativity by the mathematician Poincaré, who almost got to relativity before Einstein. 3 stages of creative work: conscious, subliminal, and then conscious again. Creative work is a matter of choosing among multiple possible combinations. Invention is discernment. We choose on aesthetic grounds. The useful combinations are precisely the most beautiful. And we have a lot of uncharted territory that helps us do this. And sometimes we see things because of the ambiguity built into the brain that perhaps are there or not there. It may be true that God's draperies in the creation of Adam resemble the inner aspect of the brain's hemisphere, the legs of an angel hanging down like the pituitary stalk, Philo's gams, or the legs of another cherub, the brainstem, that thick wire connecting conception in the penthouse to action in the basement. I'm not too sure. The brain and I were built to fill in what is missing. Remember those 2 arrows going opposite ways, the front and back face of a transparent cube flickering? It's clear we're wired for certainty, drawing conclusions with the snap of an alligator, its jaws closing on air instead of game. We never doubt a dream while dreaming. Up there on the ceiling, a real God reaches for a real Adam, but Adam's brain is only a supposition. Language in the brain. Somewhere in the left hemisphere of my brain, a monkey sits in a pile of dictionaries, surrounded by old typewriter keys, a word processor, a thesaurus on a CD, a reef of synonyms, a daisy chain of rhymes. From this same location go out the cables to my right arm, the nerve that tracks to my heart, and the half of visual space to which my arm wires the actions of my imagination. You'd think the monkey in my brain would get off my back, let me go word blind looking at a painting, let me see a woman's legs cross once without the thought of making some immortal gesture, but no. He knows the organ in which he sits is as potent as any other I'm afraid of losing. And when his pen drills through my head, parsing cables and trunk lines into syllables, I know it's just the monkey begging to be fed, or else it's cursing, cursing, cursing. Red, the color that advances. When you try to make a point, they always say, "Who are we to judge?" As if it weren't a question but a fact that everything in the world's of equal value. But the brain is built to compare and can't see red unless there's a green nearby, can't know comfort without some painful contrast. Cezanne intuitively knew how the brain sees red, knew the eye was his touch extended, that a green cloth and blue salver made the apple red, that it takes two colors to make a parade or procession. In a bowl of painted fruit, red is the color that advances. So, to correct the solipsism of the eye, here's empathy. Men and women have separate crosses to bear, tying ties, putting on a bra, not to mention the odd effluvia of their bodies. In an ideal world, they would coexist harmoniously, but sympathy extends just so far, a door held open or a threshold uncrossed. They're chatting in a bar when a drink spills in a lap, its stain shaped like a V or Mobius strip, and the other thinks of the odoriferous monthly flow or the vertical hyphen of ego. So the three last poems I'm going to read to you are about relationships, four actually, between people. Uh, and this is a poem about doing an operation that turned into a relationship poem. The enemy of good is better. You've gone back and forth dozens of times trying to make her understand, but it only gets worse. The air is blue with words. In her mind, it's enough to say, "I'm sorry," that first time. But you persist to sharpen the argument as if peeling the skin off a grape. It will bruise before it bursts. Or doing an aneurysm in a valley of the patient's brain, your operating hand more eager to grab its neck in a clip than your own brain thinking you'll sharpen its edges just a bit, make everything as straight as an autopsy, and it will all be better. But enough was enough before it got angry, and a bright burst of blood filled the valley with regret. You wish you had stopped sooner. What was good enough to cure is gone, and what is better has left you a ruin. Vise d'arte. There's a lot of operatic ink on the old man in the gym. On his left scapula, Tosca's Vise d'arte, Visi d'amore. On his right, "Please help me to be more beautiful." And at his flanks, longer inscriptions I've got no time to read. No barbed wire bands or vines clasp his arms, no designs at all, just blue words sitting against his albino skin, topped by short cropped hair already white and a sharply pointed beard neatly trimmed like a devil's. Soon art and love will begin to sag, and what will his surgeon think? Or the pathologist who flays him, or the mortician in his lab floating in, a wave of formaldehyde like typewriter correcting fluid, the soul escaping from its dermatological thesaurus into the wordless ether. What they think will depend on who they are, their literary or sexual orientation. Perhaps he hopes one will say this was an educated man, a romantic, a devotee of culture, desperate to hold his art as close as a lover. That's why they call it chemistry. In my genes, the lightning bug, the Drosophila fly, the salamander, the chimpanzee, Earth's history entire in a tongue's flick, an upturned hand, a smile that gravitates you to me like a spinning moon, and love's memory, sweet like a sugar, welded to a coiled pyrimidine. And I'm going to close with these detailed maps of the female and male brain. With a poem to my wife. After all, it is Valentine's Day. On the anniversary of the moon landing. 40 years ago today, I stood in a sick children's ward, a green paper cap on my head, watching a man take a flickering step off a ladder. Nothing else we've done seems as good. The anchor man, exclaiming in childish joy, might have been speaking for me 3 months before, as I stood on the bottom step of a spiral staircase on Bay State Road, watching you descend in bouffant sleeves and a glowing orb of hair, my first look and a lunar landing of another kind. I write these words 3 days after Cronkite's died, and no one's gone back to the moon in decades, the other side dark and barely known. 1 week after that epical landing, we entered into our own mystery. And voyaging on, love, it's still a thrill to see you turn your face to me. Thank you very much.